Hi everyone, my name is Richard Koch and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Today it's a very focused presentation on a very detailed step, but probably a critical step in the whole design control process. As you can see from the slide, one ticket for code and documents. It almost sounds like Lord of the Ring, one ring to rule them all. So today we'll go through probably about 10 minutes of presentation just to frame it. And then we'll move into sharing my screen and going into my own product documentation so you can see how it works in practice. Okay, if anybody's watching, could they please just put a comment in the post and let me know if you can hear me? That'll be great. Thank you very much. But moving right along. So quickly, a little bit about me. My focus at the moment is moving more and more on the how of medical device software compliance. There's a lot of people out there who focus on what you need to comply with, but at least in my experience, sorry, 1 second. Yes, we have confirmation, we can be heard. At least in my experience, the methods of implementing that in an efficient way and a way that software developers work, it's very limited. So I think more and more I'm heading on the how. In terms of my background, I had an experience in finance departments in multinationals for a long time in different industries. I had 5 years in a leadership position in analog, call it analog medtech. It was physical devices, silicon gels for scar treatment and prevention. And since 2018, I've been working on my own medical device software project, Puri, and also doing some consulting. And sorry about that, my logo, which was meant to be there, seems to have dropped off the bottom of the screen. That's okay. So today, where we focus on is the green bits in the design V. So I think everybody's seen this and should recognize it from medical device. You start with product requirements, move through to software requirements into detailed design. Obviously, somewhere in that process, you've got architectural design. You implement the code, then you verify, validate, do system test, verify, validate, and then release. But buried in those green sections is a lot of detail, which is lost by the, so my presentation is again a little bit dropped off at the bottom. So I'm going to try a different method. I really apologize about that. Okay, I'll have to do a bit of it. Yeah, I can do a scroll. There we go. So what we're going to look at today is, again, if we take the V all the way to the bottom, product requirements, software requirements, detailed design. Now, what we have on this slide are my tickets I use, and I'll show you that in a minute how I do it. So basically, I set up my Jira to have boards around each of these groupings, link them using these link types. Product requirement causes software requirements, software requirement causes detailed design. And then once you get to the bottom detailed design ticket, then the bit on the right, everyone does. You got a ticket, you create a sub branch in your code repo, you code the branch, you raise a pull request, and then you merge into one of the main branches, depending on your branch strategy. Now, what I do is at that time, I also create a branch from the ticket into my documentation repo. So I don't use Confluence, I don't use Word documents. I'm using Markdown files in a code repo to manage my documentation. And basically the process works that we create the sub branch either at the same time or later on in the process. We create the branch for the documentation, and we try to make sure that pretty much at the same time that the code gets merged, we merge the update to the documentation from this ticket. And it's pretty much that simple, this process. But again, it's something I haven't really seen in practice. I think there's a lot of device companies out there using EQMSs, using Confluence, using document-based systems, I guess there is a way to manage your documentation from a project management point of view using Jira or DevOps, but to actually create that link, which is very important, via the tickets, is a little bit more complicated in those, if not impossible. So moving on a bit, from my point of view, the merging the code is a key design control in the software development process. So obviously in terms of code quality, you need to make sure the code works before you merge, your unit tests, integration tests, etc. But also it's a good opportunity for the teams to align the code with the technical file. And I think anybody who's on this call that's been involved in software for a while, often documentation is an afterthought, or the technical file is an afterthought, which is done as a rush at the end of the project. But it doesn't have to be. You can do it while you deploy the code and just, again, do this incrementalism and really get a really tight control over your project. Now, the readiness before the merge. Okay, let me start again. If the merge is the key control in your process, you want a good definition of done prior to merging, okay? And you can see on the right-hand side, that's high importance. Now, on the left-hand side, the definition of ready before you start that stage, in my view, of a less importance. And I've had these conversations with clients about waterfall, agile, etc. And to be honest, I never really know what it means until I've seen their design and development process, because what one company calls waterfall, another company will not call waterfall, and what one company calls agile, another company won't call agile. So really the importance is, what you do in practice and what your process is. So the importance of the controlling it before the merge is, what you can do is make sure that you have a checklist for the merge where you basically go back up through the design V, all the way to your requirements, and make sure everything is complete before you merge that code. So what in practice, what happens is a lot of our, let's say, prototyping, we get our ideas from actually coding first to see what it looks like, which is valid. Sometimes it comes from requirements through a proper linear design process into a development ticket. Sometimes, who knows, right? But what we can do is, at that point, before we merge, look at the status of the ticket and of our technical file, make sure it's completely up to date, and then merge together. And I'll show you some techniques for that in a minute. There is an important point here about leadership. It really takes discipline to do this. It's very easy to do the shortcuts. Okay, let's just push the code, progress with the product, and we'll do it later. But unfortunately, in medical devices, everyone knows, it doesn't matter how good your code is, if you can't prove it's followed a compliant design control process. And again, I've seen that quite a lot of times. Great architects, great developers, etc., but very poor documentation, and it becomes very difficult to pass any sort of meaningful audits. And the remediation costs of deploying code without the documentation, without following the design controls, can be very expensive and very slow. So again, the discipline, the leadership there on the teams is super important. And finally, I reviewed this presentation with my development team this morning, and they highlighted the importance of commenting on your commits. So you should have clear and meaningful comments, summary, descriptions, the ticket number. You get the ticket number obviously through the branch name. And if you have good commit messages, means you don't have to dig through the code to understand what happened in that branch. You don't have to dig through the documentation repo to understand what happened in updating that documentation. And again, I think where this starts is in how you write your tickets. If you write good tickets, good requirements, good design, everything becomes easy, but you get this flow through your whole development process. Now, these are screenshots from the tools I use. They're a bit blurry, very happy to go into detail a bit later in the presentation when we look at the live technical file. But I think the key one here is really traceability. So we've got tools. I use a tool called Link Explorer Traceability Report, and here we've got the traceability from a detailed design ticket, which has to be caused by a software requirement ticket, but also has to be covered by a test. So we can do that pretty simply with a coverage report here. And then the other ones you can see here, which are the Confluence ones, is what I call the verification reports. So while the traceability reports, you can see ticket linking to tickets. In the verification report, you can see the content of tickets versus the content of the other tickets. So you can actually read it and compare individually or as a team, and just verify that the actual content makes sense, so that the detailed design actually does implement the requirement, that the test does actually test the detailed design, etc. So these are just tools you can use to help with the process. Now, there's a bigger issue here, which I'll probably do another webinar on, in terms of what items and units mean in terms of 62304. So at a very high level, your detailed design has theoretical items and units, and I can't remember the exact phrasing from 62304, but it's effectively up to the manufacturer to define what an item and a unit is. Now, in reality, your code is where the item and units are coded. And the other bit to pick from this slide is that if you're doing your documentation in repo, you'll have a file structure for your documentation. You can sort of see a little bit here on the left. You can see my development file structure. And then obviously in the code, depending on what framework, language, etc. you're using, it will have its own structure. And there's never a one-to-one match there, which does obviously drive a lot of discussions on how you define an item and a unit. But importantly here is when we get this idea where you've got a ticket which branches out into a code repo and a documentation repo, that JIRA ticket is really the bit that links everything. So it allows you to go from a ticket into your branches, into what change in your documentation or your code, or from either of the repos back up to the ticket. Okay, you can follow it through a commit, or in the documentation, I try to put a change log at the bottom of all of my design files, so I can see the history of what's changed. In that effectively, what I'm documenting is a unit. And if we move on, that's the end of the presentation. So just give me a second here. I'm going to share a different screen. We'll go live to the live technical file. Okay, here it is. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just take a look at basically my project management and work through a single example of really doing the documentation. So the code in this case will be merged already, but the documentation hasn't. So just a quick tour of my project. So the way I structure it is around here, around the boards. So you can see from this drop down that, apologies, I'm just having a few technical issues on my side with my tabs. Right, there we go. Yeah, so you can see from the drop downs here, I structure my boards basically around the design V. So I've got one for product requirements, one for software requirements, detailed design. Obviously the code is done through links to Git. I've got a board for risk, board for verification, which has all my X-ray test cases. And I also have a board for my documentation backlog. So it gives you a pretty good overview of everything, and I can see plan before I implement, and then trace everything through. So where we're at now is a detailed design, as we said initially. I'll take the timeline view here. So if I look at the release, we're just about to release our release 4.1, and these are the epics I've got in it. and the current epic we're working in is the functional upgrades. And you can see here in the tickets, the ones which are done status, basically that means the code, the branch has been merged, tested and merged into the dev branch. And also the documentation repo has been updated. So the way we can see that is we've got the ticket here. It's probably not a great example. Yeah, well, fine. We just had to update the what's it called, the pod file, I think, for the Apple build. What we can see here in the linking, that we've actually got two branches linked to the tickets. So if I open that, we can see we've got one branch going to the documentation where we have where that was updated, and we've got another update going to the code. So, you know, again, just to reinforce the point, I can see from the ticket what has changed in my, you know, obviously the two most important parts of the product itself and the product documentation. So it's pretty easy. And then, you know, again, here we can see, you know, the status of the pull request, etc. So what we can do here is, what are we doing here? Yeah. So in practice, what that means, we're working on this. This code is still in progress, but I can create the branch. So we're updating a filter for the dashboard. And what we can do here is clearly we've got one branch here. You can see that's the branch for it's in the code repo. So I'm just going to create another branch here. So I'm using GitHub. Click there, go through the GitHub screen. I choose my documentation repo branch from my 4.10 branch. So I just create a branch for the release and just leave the branch name alone, create the branch. There we go, it's been created. We go to the documentation repo and you can see here, these are the branches I've got. So I've forgotten the ticket number now, 2814. And we've got the branch. Oh, yeah, we're in the branch already. Here we go, 2814. So pretty easy. And I work on Android Studio, so I'll clone that locally, do the updates, commit, and then raise a pull request. So what I want to do is share with you one sort of in the middle of working on at the moment. So I just need to quickly do a commit from my local machine, which is in progress. Let me push that. Okay, it should be done. And if we come here to Git, that would be branch 1137. 1137. There we go. You see the push 13 seconds ago. So what we're doing here is, if we go to the ticket quickly, I've got ticket 1137 there. So again, I think everybody in the call will know this. From the branch ID, you get the ticket ID, pretty easy. And this is, we did a sort of a redesign of the account functions. We just moved some functions off the main left-hand navigation, and we deleted some submenus, just made it a little bit easier to use. So that's the ticket written. So that's basically what the design for this ticket will look like. And we've got the change here. I think we might just go, look, we don't want to raise a pull request. Let me just go to the branch itself, 1137. And if we work through it, basically I've got two sections here, the development file, that's my design file. I've got the medical device file here. And you see, again, it's pretty simple. I just structure the development file around the stages of 62304, development planning, product requirements, SRS, and I like using just the three-digit codes. Effectively, it just makes things a lot shorter and simpler. This is my detailed design file. So here I basically break my detailed design around my physical environments or code bases here, and third-party services such as app stores, web hosting, etc. So we've got the Flutter here, front end, and I know this is how I group the functions. So it's basically grouped around functions, epics, features, however you want to describe it. And what I've done here is it's a left-hand nav function. Why can't I see it? Okay, I'm in the wrong branch, that's why. Okay, so there we go. We've got the front here. We can see the changes. Here, left-hand nav account. And this is the files, well, basically the set of files I'm working on. So I think this is the one that, yeah, this is the file that I'm working on changing. So this is just simple markdown files, as you can see. And the way I do it, simple user story for that function, which is basically opening the page or clicking on a function. Precondition, acceptance criteria, what happens on the page. Dependencies, which are generally the front end, the API is working. You could go deeper into controllers or objects, which depending on the safety class of your software could be a good idea. The interface design, so these are just PNGs exported. These are the old ones because I'm in the middle of editing. And then the development history. So I've got the release history, and here you can see the tickets where it's been developed. So again, I copy and paste here, so I've got like pretty easy access to the tickets. If I want to go see it, I've just got to click on the ticket, and I can see the history, see what happened, or obviously I can go to the release branch and follow the commits. So yeah, so really in practice, that's kind of it. I'm going to assume everybody's done a pull request before. What I can do is raise the pull request here. I'm not going to approve it. So let's pull request, compare pull request, write the description. I'm not going to necessarily do it here. I'm doing it into the 4.10 release, so it's the latest release, which is important. You can see all the changes here that have done, and that's obviously super important. And I think this is one of the benefits that people think they're getting out of Microsoft Word or even Confluence. They're using the Microsoft Word change function, or they're using the version compare in Confluence. But again, we're not going into the difficulties of that here. But the coders on the call will clearly understand that if you're using this compare function, you're seeing exactly what changed. And if you understand the context, you follow the design process, you can do a really good review and obviously have a lot of control and approval over the pull request. So I'm not seeing a lot of QAR people, at least from a traditional document-based environment, doing this or understanding it. But that's really the opportunity to bring our QAR people into this mode of working, upskill them, so the developers and the QAR people can really work at the same velocity. Longer lecture, longer conversation on there, but I think from the people I've seen who've attending the call, they will understand that. So I'll create the pull request here. You create the pull request. And again, I'm a small team, so it's really just me. Hopefully I'll grow. I can see the pull request here. See the files changed. Unfortunately, I accidentally deleted some folders and had to restore them locally. So that's what a lot of these are. But again, here's some, these are pictures. Yeah, you can see here just some changes. I mean, this is now starting to get into a little bit more detail that maybe we don't really want to get into here. So ultimately, that's more or less the conversation. And importantly, in the design and development planning is to really work out here what this workflow looks like, not just for a design and not just for the developers, but for the whole team, because these workflows will align the team. And I think this will be the last point. If I go to, so we're in the main branch. So I can go to my last release, the 4.0 release, which was the first release I did. if we go into the the tool chain, for example, I've got a section here on Jira configuration, and in the Jira configuration, obviously got the ticket types, how they're used, and then I've got the workflows here. So this is obviously a text-based version of the workflow, but I can create a link here to Jira. But we have workflows effectively by different ticket types. And this is hugely important because your product requirement workflow is going to be very different to your software requirement workflow. It's going to be different to your design and development, which is going to be different to your testing, going to be different to your risk, etc., etc. And I think the complexity of the of the 62304 and the actual operationalizing of 62304 and Agile toolset across both technical documentation and code, it's not difficult, but it's hugely complex, or it can be hugely complex. And this simplified V and simplified statements by regulators in 62304, which say things like it's up to the manufacturer to define units and tests and these sort of things. Don't get me wrong, they're good guidance and these are things we have to do. Really hides the complexity that software teams need to go through to manage this. And again, I'll just encourage anybody on the call who's interested, feel free to talk to me. I'm happy to speak to anyone. But aside from the technical side, I really see this as a leadership issue, because software is a medical device, or any sort of medical device software. As I said before, the code is useless without the compliant documentation. And if you're in the feeds, we're seeing a lot of recalls or a lot of dangerous situations coming from software. I think from the last time I checked, software recalls are probably the largest category of recalls, and they just keep happening over and over again. And we've seen, I think recently, Philips had a recall from one of their machines. I believe it was software related, class 1 recall. There was another class 1 recall. I can't remember the product again, but we're seeing it more and more. And at least from my experience, I would say one of the root cause is the tooling that people use, document-based management systems, or even EQMS, which use documents as a unit of grouping content, doesn't work, because really it's documents with metadata. And you need to move to more agile, more project overview, where you can see everything in one go. Critical to safety is traceability. And I think we're in an early stage of a revolution here, where you can do it like I'm doing it at the moment through, this is very manual based Git. I realize that, but I have plans to evolve this through build agents, and also starting to have early discussions with some very innovative developers who are building Git based products to do this. So, if you're Git ready and your teams are Git ready, I'm pretty confident the products are going to come pretty soon, and you'll be able to drop your Word, drop your Excel, drop your Jira, even drop your Confluence, and work purely in Git. And that's a pretty exciting thing. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any questions. If there are, please drop them in the chat. There is a bit of delay on the call. I'm not sure how many people are watching, because it is a very specific type of presentation. And if there are no questions, I'll hang up the call. And feel free to send me a message. I'm very happy to speak to anyone. I'm a consultant. Obviously, you're free to hire me, but to talk to me, you don't have to hire me. I think there's a community of innovative people out there, and I'd love to have a connection and meet you. So just give me 1 second. We'll see if there are any questions. No, just one. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for attending. And I think we'll wrap it up. Right. Okay. Thanks everyone for your time. Hopefully you got some value out of it, and hopefully we get to speak in person one day. Wish you a good afternoon. Bye for now.